Okay, well, let's get started. First of all, welcome back, everybody. A few notes before we move on with the program. A second sign-in sheet will be passed around, and which will give you the PDH credits that you need for the afternoon session. If you require the credits and have attended for the full day, be sure you've signed both sign-in sheets, both the morning and the afternoon, and then the certificates will be distributed again as they were at the morning session towards the end of the afternoon session. So without further ado, let me introduce our next speaker, Keith Wen. Keith Wen is the technical advisor to the commissioner at the department. He helps shape the department's technical policies by working collaboratively with other government agencies and interested parties, and through the issuance of building bulletins that interpret the construction codes and zoning resolutions for the city. He served recently as the technical advisor on 2 committees during the New York City Construction Codes revision cycle and on the Sandy consultation team, a free service for homeowners to directly assist them in their rebuilding efforts. Prior to working for the New York City Department of Buildings, Keith was an architect at the United Spinal Association, formerly Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association. Keith received his Bachelor of Architecture from Pratt Institute. He is a member of the National Council of Architectural Region Boards and is a certified International Code Council accessibility specialist. Keith?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? Is this okay? All right. So thank you for all coming back. I'm actually quite surprised that everybody's back here. I've read a study that actually 2 p.m. is most conducive to sleeping or napping, especially after lunch. But yes, sir. So I hope all of you can stay with me because it's only going to be about 40 minutes long, and we'll get through it. Sorry for sounding like a spin class trainer. All right, so the first chapter that I'm going to talk about is chapter 10, means of egress. The egress chapter is very interesting. We had a great committee reviewing 2009 IBC changes in chapter 10 and plow through all the issues, and we're able to come to consensus on many of the issues. I have to say that when we review the changes there, we try to increase the level of egress safety, however, without sacrificing, providing more allowances where it makes sense. There are some design challenges when you're designing a means of egress system. And also, there are new technologies on the market. So the committee was able to reconcile all of those things and put everything into chapter 10. So remember in the 1968 code, we had table 6-1, which actually is still there, table 6-1. And in order to determine your means of egress system, to design your means of egress width, you have to look at that table and figuring out, which occupancy group you belong to. And I think there are about maybe 10, 12 of those. And you have to go through each one of them, and under each one, you have different columns, some for doors, some for stairways, some for corridors, some for ramps, some for doorways. There are a lot of numbers on that table. So back in the 2008, when we did the changes in the code, 2003 IBC, which was the base code, everything was simplified. There were only 2 sets of numbers, 2 sets of factors. One set for high hazard occupancies. You have 0.7, and I think the next number is like 0.5 or 0.3, and you have everything else. Well, in the 2009 IBC, it's even more reduced, even more simplified. So now there are only 2 numbers, 0.3 inch per occupant for stairways and 0.2 inch per occupant for other egress components. Simple enough. Automatic turnstiles were not really clearly addressed in both the 1968 code and 2008 code, but they are very commonly found in a lot of office building lobbies. You'll find them all over the place, and they're basically, in the lobby, counting people going in, coming out. but it was never clear if they are really fully legal. So in the 2014 code, we have put in a number of conditions, and we have made it clear that if you can meet all of these conditions, automatic turnstiles can work safely in a building. So the first requirement is minimum 32-inch for a typical turnstile. That's the width that you measure from 18 inches above the floor and down. And if the automatic turnstile serves an accessible means of egress, accessible path, then it has to be 36 inches wide, wide enough for wheelchair to pass through. And that's measured 34 inches off the floor and down. Well, these units are typically, devices are typically connected to electricity. They're electrically powered. So in case of power failure, there has to be a feature that would allow them to be breakaway. So 13 pounds is the maximum force that you can exert in order to break away these things. And in fact, they have to be connected to a fire alarm system in the building. So in case if there's a fire emergency, the fire detection system detected something triggering the fire alarm system will have to then activate the turn open mode for all these turnstiles so that everybody can get out of the building freely. And of course, there has to be an integrated source of emergency power for all these devices. And there are more requirements that you can find in the building code section. Stairway doors, typically the requirement is that they cannot be locked either on the egress side or the stair side. They have to remain unlocked all the way through. However, in the 2008 code, there is an allowance for buildings that are not more than 4 stories. That the assumption is people can simply just walk down the stairs and get out of the building. So in the 2008 code, the allowance is that on both the egress side and the stair side, doors can be locked. In the 2014 code, we have maintained that same allowance. However, there's one additional condition. The door from the stair side can only be locked if it's capable of being unlocked from the fire command station, if there's one in the building, or it has to be at a location near the front entrance so that the fire department can unlock all these doors when they arrive. I think James mentioned earlier that there are some handrail requirements in Title 28. So the IBC also made some changes, specific changes to the handrail section. Traditionally, we have the Type 1, what they call the Type 1 handrail, which are the ones that, has a certain diameter allowance, perimeter length, and also dimensional size restrictions, because they are easier to grasp. These are the Type 1 that are allowed for most of the occupancies required, in fact. But there is now an allowance for what they call a Type 2. Type 2 is the type that is, it's got a more elaborate profile that are commonly found within dwelling units. So they're allowed in R2 and R3 dwelling units, and also Group U utility occupancies. Now, before the 2014 code, in the 2008 code, there was already this requirement of having guardrails when there's a 30-inch drop, when you are near a walking surface, a ramp, a landing, a platform, what have you. But it was never clear before, how do you measure that 30-inch drop? Do you measure right up against the edge of the platform? Do you measure a foot away? Do you measure 10 feet away? So the 2014 code now made it clear that that 30-inch drop is measured within 36 inches from the edge of that walking surface. Now, I mentioned before that when the Egress Committee worked on this chapter, we also recognized a lot of design challenges and new technologies. This is one of those. It is pretty common when you see a larger tenant, like a mall or like a larger mercantile occupancy, and within which you'll find like a small pharmacy, maybe a small coffee shop. And those places, those spaces, typically they are serving the same tenants. And the assumption is that they're just pretty much shopping and they're just having a cup of coffee, and should something happen, they would know where to come back to. So now there's an allowance for that type of smaller tenant space to exit through a larger adjoining Group M mercantile occupancy, because otherwise the code explicitly prohibits you from going through a next door tenant space to get out of the building. So here's an allowance. There's some limitation. It has to be no more than 10% of the larger tenant. Like I said before, it has to be a Group M. And there has to be a discernible path from inside that smaller space. I would know where to go. I would know which door that I should take in order to get back into the Group M. And of course, the door can't be locked during business hours, and also must be serving the same patrons. This is actually one of the first questions that we got when we first passed the 2008 code. There's an allowance for having dead-end distance of 80 feet when you have a 2-hour rated corridor in an R2 occupancy. Great. How do you use it? Well, if the common path of travel is limited to 75 feet, which is measured from the most remote point within a space, which typically is the apartment, from within the apartment, you measure that 75 feet out to the corridor, you pretty much exhausted that 75 feet right away. So that 80 feet dead end doesn't really work with the 75 feet common path of travel. By the way, the common path of travel distance is measured to the point in which you can go to one exit or the other. Dead end distance, on the other hand, is where you are traveling in one direction towards an exit. So when you see the two lines here, they don't really work together. So what we did in 2014 code is that we have extended that common path to 125 feet for R2 occupancy, provided the building is fully sprinklered. So now the 125 feet common path will work nicely with the 80 feet dead end. The 2008 code required intervening hall when you are designing an R2 occupancy. The whole idea of the intervening hall is that there is a buffer zone so that when there's a smoke condition, either inside the apartment or in the stairway, one thing won't contaminate the other. So there are some allowances for smaller buildings that they don't have to have the intervening hall. And those exceptions are maintained in the 2014 code. So these two bullets here, if the R2 building is no more than 3 stories with no more than 2 units per floor, you don't need an intervening hall. And also, if you happen to qualify for the one exit allowance in 1021.2, which used to be 1018.2 in the 2008 code exception, no more than 4 stories, no more than 3 units per floor, no more than 2,500 square feet per floor, you can enjoy the one exit and you don't have to worry about the intervening hall. We have added more allowances without sacrificing safety. For most non-high-rise buildings, now you can install smoke and draft control doors in lieu of the intervening public hall. If you happen to pay attention to Marshall's presentation this morning, that's the piece that he mentioned. UL 1784 is the standard. If you can comply with that, then you can do away with the intervening public hall without jeopardizing either the hall or the unit. For high rises, there's also some exceptions there, but they're not as broad. So if you happen to be designing duplexes within a high-rise building, and on that particular story, all you have is the upper floor of duplexes, then there are some allowances that you can enjoy. Some stairs, they actually continue all the way down through to the cellar or basement. So when you have a situation like that, the code requires you to actually put a barricade at the level of exit discharge. The idea is that if you are running down the stairs, they don't want you to miscalculate and thought, I have to continue down more because this is not the street yet. Let me continue down. Well, if you have that barrier, then people would know, okay, this is the end of this, and the exit sign is pointing to the lobby, I have to go out, or pointing to the exterior, I have to get out now. So that separation used to be 1 hour rated wall with 3/4 hour door. Now in the 2014 code, you can do a combination of partitions with doors or gates. The concept is still there, but it's a little bit more relaxed, and it's actually good for when you are doing stair pressurization. Now, I mentioned exit discharge through the lobby. Traditionally, typically, you really have to design your stairs in a way that 100% discharge is outside of the building. That's the baseline requirement. However, it's not really that easy to achieve. So the code provides some allowances without sacrificing safety again. Exception 1 in that section allows you to discharge up to half of your egress capacity through a protected lobby. What does that mean, protected lobby? We got that question a lot too. So it has to be sprinklered, the floor is rated, walls are rated. So within that protected zone, people are able to transition through and get out of the building. There's another exception when you have a small vestibule, and it's really meant to be at the perimeter of the building, and people quickly come into that vestibule space and transition through and get out of the building. Now, those two conditions are not really meant to be combined to achieve the 100% through the building exit. So now we made it clear in the 2014 code that you cannot combine the two. Talking about going through the protected area, the challenge here is that if you have a stair that's coming through the lobby, and while you are still traveling to your final exit of the building, the code requires that final exit to be readily visible and identifiable. But that's not easy sometimes because the stair door might not be facing the building exit door. It might be behind me. Or maybe there's an elevator lobby right in between. Or the orientation is not right. So the code now makes it clear that there is a 40 feet allowance. That's the 40 feet from the exit door from the stairway, and I'll have to get to a point within 40 feet that I can see the building exit, and I know where to go. In the 2008 code, for some reason, the city did not adopt ICC 300. Which I believe is something that started with federal requirements in terms of bleacher safety. So when you are designing bleacher as defined in the definition here, bleachers, grandstands, folding, telescoping, seating, you're supposed to comply with ICC 300. So this time around, we were able to adopt ICC 300. So in the future, if you're designing these things, please refer to ICC 300 for safety requirements. Local Law 26 of 2004 requires photoluminescent markings in high-rise office buildings. And then in the 2008 code, we also carry over the photoluminescent requirement and in fact expanded that to cover not just high-rise office buildings, but all high-rises except for R2 high-rise buildings. So by the time we expanded the requirement, we were still relying on the same reference standard 6-1 for the specific installation requirements for photoluminescent marking. And at that time, the source, the light source, the sensitivity of the material used to be 2-foot candle. Now in the 2014 code, this whole thing is nationalized, thanks to partly to James Colgate, who are really a propellant for having these kind of markings in high-rise buildings, and also NIST because they were pushing for it. So now we have the requirement in the 2014 code still, but we have a new reference standard. The material must comply with either UL 1994 or ASTM E2072. Now the distinction here is that the charging source, it's a little bit less because the material is more sensitive, so it's only 1-foot candle. Well, the takeaway is that you should not mix the two materials. If you have a set of materials that comply with RS6-1, that should not be mixed with other materials that are in compliance with UL 1994 or ASTM E2072. Marshall also mentioned this piece before. Automatic whole open doors. Traditionally, when you have exit stairways with those vertical exit doors, they're supposed to remain closed. We didn't really like the idea of having all those doors open. However, Green Code Task Force made a recommendation to promote active use of stairways to reduce obesity rate and also to reduce energy use, because every time you press the button to take an elevator, you are consuming power. So in recognition of that recommendation, there was a local law that passed, allowing up to 3 consecutive floors having 3 doors on magnetic hole open device within a building. And those doors on the magnetic hole open device, they have to be linked to the building fire alarm system. So should something go wrong, if there's a fire, if the fire detection system goes off, the magnet will release and those doors will be back into their closed position. The next chapter I'm going to cover is accessibility. Also, we have a very great committee here who did a whole lot of work trying to work out all the details in the accessibility chapter. On the national level, I think the ICC also was trying very hard, just like us, to align our chapter and all the requirements with Fair Housing Act and also the 2010 ADA standards. There's still a lot to do. So all I can tell you is that whatever you see here is the best we can do at this point, and also what ICC can do at this point to align with fair housing. In terms of 2010 ADA standards, it is really your responsibility to make sure that you consult with the 2010 ADA, and if you have any questions, you should give them a call to figure out exactly what you are required to do with the building in terms of ADA compliances. So the first thing we did was, instead of still continuing the 2003 ANSI standard, A117.1, we moved on to the 2009 version, which is the latest version. For those of you who don't know, in Chapter 11 and also Appendix P, Appendix E, you will find scoping information, meaning what type of buildings are subject to accessibility requirements, where you have to provide those items. In the ANSI standard, that's where you find out how you can comply. They talk about dimensions. They talk about things in inches, 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. When we adopted the Type B unit from the ANSI standard that I just mentioned, that was back in 2008. Type B unit in the ANSI standard it's meant to address fair housing requirements. So when the city adopted that, the city made a number of modifications to further enhance the unit. However, we did not change the term. So there was some confusion as to what the Type B unit means nationally and what the Type B unit means locally. So this time around, we just simply changed the term to what we call Type B+NYC unit. So now there's a definition in 1102. The definition is that it's a dwelling unit, sleeping unit designed and constructed for accessibility in accordance with this code. Section 1004, which is what's in the ANSI standard for Type B units, as modified by sections 1107.2.1 through 1107.2.8. So when people ask, what are those modifications? Where are they at? It's actually in the definition itself, so you can quickly go to the relevant sections and find out exactly what that means. And the definition also refers to Appendix P, which I'm going to cover in just a few minutes. There's a legacy allowance in the 2008 code for flex closet. That's the closet that you put next to your entry doorway, and that's something that you can disassemble when needed. Well, we found out that this allowance is too onerous and nobody really does that anymore. It's difficult to enforce. So now that allowance is out the door. There are some items in Chapter 11 that you don't have to provide at the outset. You can actually provide it upon occupancy by a person with disabilities or upon request, 10-day notice. In the 2008 code, we had a few of those. Now, in the 2014 code, we have expanded that concept to 3 more items: operable windows, storage, and hand shower. And I'm going to cover operable windows on the next slide. So for operable windows, there's a long history of how difficult it is to comply with that item, because there's just simply it's too difficult to provide a window that will withstand the pressure difference between the interior and the exterior, especially when you're in a high-rise building. There's also, limitations on, your window will have to comply with the energy code. There's also, wind load and all that stuff. So we have heard from the industry, and we have made some adjustments and clarify exactly what needs to be done to operable windows. So now there are two sets of rules. One set of rule applies to type B+NYC units, and another set of rule applies to accessible units. Accessible units are the ones that, for example, you will find in a hotel room. There is a percentage of hotel rooms that are supposed to be fully accessible to people with disabilities. So getting back to the type B+ unit, the first requirement is that it applies only to the windows that are really meant for providing ventilation. So if you look at Chapter 12, you have designed your units, and if certain windows are required to provide sufficient air into that space, that's the window that is supposed to comply with this requirement. Also, if you're designing a building, I think 4 stories, up to 4 stories, there are requirements for escape and rescue unless the building is sprinklered. So for the escape and rescue windows, of course, people will have to be able to get out, including people with disabilities, so that the fire department can get them out. So those are the windows that are applicable. Second thing is there has to be a clear floor space right in front of the window, 30 by 48-inch clear floor space right in front of that. And there's a height limitation for reaching the operable parts. In the 2009 NC standard, that reach height is limited to 48 inches. Even when you are doing a side reach, it's 48 inches. Finally, if that operable part cannot be within reach at the outset, there's an allowance for providing an adapted device that is compatible to that operable part. And upon 10-day notice, the occupant can request that by sending you the 10-day notice. For accessible unit, it applies to only one window within the room. But other than that, there are really not much allowances there. It has to comply with 309 of A117.1, which include, I think, a few items here: clear floor space, height limitation, and operable force. And you can't use the adapted device. But that's only for accessible units. The United States Postal Services, USPS, has been trying to work out the differences with US HUD as to exactly what's required for mailboxes. Now, the USPS had a set of rules about exactly how high you can mount these things and how low you can mount these things. Happened to coincide with US HUD's requirement based on fair housing, how low you can mount these things and how high you can mount these things. So until they can reconcile the differences, at this point, the only range that you can provide these mailboxes at that can meet both the USPS requirements and the fair housing requirements is between 15 inches to 48 inches above the finished floor. Now, if you already printed your handout a few days ago, when you look at this slide, slide 28, please make a correction because there has been an error in our 2014 code online version. Please cross out I3 occupancy. And also, I think it referred to 1107.5.6 or something. Cross that out. This slide, the section only applies to I2 occupancies. So what happened here is in the 2008 code, for I2 occupancies, the requirement was so straightforward that 100% of the units must be accessible. However, in recognition of the targeted occupants, typically they don't really have severe mobility impairment. I'm talking about occupancies in convalescent, enriched assisted living residences, and special needs assisted living residences. These are the types of residences that are typically recognized by the New York State. So if you are dealing with these types of occupancies and you are getting funding from the New York State DOH, if you meet the criteria, now that section allows you to have a combination of a number of accessible units and a number of type B+NYC units. In the 2008 code, there was a requirement for having a percentage of bathrooms, single-user bathrooms, when they're clustered together, that they have to be in compliance with Chapter 11. Well, that concept has been expanded to portable toilet bathing unit as well. So if you have a cluster of these, minimum 5% of them must comply with accessibility standards, and they have to have the international symbol of accessibility mounted. This is another terminology issue. We used to call unisex toilet rooms in both Chapter 11 and also Plumbing Code Chapter 4. But unisex toilet rooms are really meant for when you are not required to have separate sex facilities. So if you have a really small restaurant having, say, 25 people, we would actually allow you to have one unisex bathroom serving both sexes. No need to separate the two sexes, to have two separate toilet rooms. So unisex rooms is meant to address that. In 1109, in Chapter 11, for a larger assembly occupancy and a very large M occupancy, besides what's required in the plumbing code in terms of plumbing fixtures, there's an additional requirement for a standalone family-type assisted use toilet room. And the whole idea is that someone from the family can assist another member of the family in privacy inside that room. So now we have two distinct terminologies for each one. Now this is the fun part. If you haven't been paying attention, please pay attention now. Drinking fountains. And so the drinking fountains requirement, that section there, a lot of changes have been made, because the fun part there is back in 2008, the requirement was very simple. Half of your drinking fountains will have to comply with accessibility requirements. Well, in the 2014 code, also in the 2009 IBC, also in the 2010 ADA, there has to be a high-low fountain requirement. So what that means is that for each fountain, you have to have one high, one low, or a combination high-low. What does that mean, high-low? The high one is supposed to be used by people who are standing. The low one is supposed to be used by people who are wheelchair users. So one high, one low, or one high-low combo. But if you're required to provide two fountains by the plumbing table, you are also doing one high, one low, or a high-low combo. It's recognized as two fixtures. So if you are doing 10, essentially you can do 5 high, 5 low, or 5 high-low combo. Now, some of you might be looking at this picture and frown like, what's going on here? Something is missing. Where is the bottle filler faucet? Well, there's a requirement in PC 410 that you have to provide the bottle filler faucet so that you can fill your plastic or metal, aluminum bottle with water without actually using the drinking spout. So that requirement's been in place for a few years. So the changes we have made this time around in the 2014 code is not to undo that requirement for having the bottle filler faucet. So you still have to provide that. And in fact, in PC 410.2, there's an allowance for you to actually provide the type of fountains that are without drinking spout at all. So the drinking spout there can be gone. You can have the bottle filler faucets only, but it's only up to 50% of the drinking fountains. So in this picture here, you can see that it's only counted as one unit because there's one with the, well, there's actually a problem even counting as one unit because the bottle filler faucet is supposed to appear on both the high and the low. So what we are trying to fix here is that for some people who are unable to use a bottle, don't possess a bottle, or simply having a disability that can't use a bottle, who have to be able to drink directly from the fountain. So what does that mean? Well, if there are 5 fountains required, every single one of them must have the bottle filling feature. Okay, so you see they appear in all 5. 2 of them, which is up to 50%, can be the standalone type without the drinking spouts. The other three will have to have the drinking spout, but they must comply with the high-low requirements. So you see 2 high and 1 low. You can also do 2 low and 1 high. It's not rocket science, right? One thing I have to mention, and I have not yet mentioned, is they have to be in close proximity so that I don't have to hunt for it or someone doesn't have to hunt for it. LULA elevator, limited use, limited application elevators. These are the types of elevators that are supposed to really meant to go up a few stories. And the whole idea is that it's space saving. The machinery, it's a little less bulky, so a lot of people want to specify that. So in the 2008 code, we used to allow that for new buildings, provided that it's no more than 10,000 square feet. Well, we found out that the ADA might not like that, so we have to remove that allowance. But you can continue to specify LULA elevators for buildings, for prior code buildings. And it's the same criteria, no more than 3 stories and no more than 10,000 square feet. And also, if you are allowed to provide a lift, a vertical lift, or a vertical platform lift, or inclined platform lift in your building, you can use LULA as a substitution as well. Now, there are situations when you design a type B+NYC unit that there are more than one same fixture, meaning you have 2 lavatories or 2 water closets or maybe 2 tubs within that same bathroom. So in recognition of that, we are going to allow the secondary fixture to comply with the more relaxed set of rules, which is in the NC standard, it's the type B option A. And also, because we recognize that we have already put in a lot of requirements in the Appendix P bathroom, and the space is very usable, there was a decision made that the door maneuvering clearance inside the bathroom is no longer required. It can be taken away. However, the reversible door piece is no longer allowed. The reversible door concept came from Local Law 58 when we said, well, when you're designing your bathroom, you can design it in a way that in the future, the door will swing the right way and providing the necessary clearances for the wheelchair user. So that idea was carried over into the 2008 code, and we are going to stop that in the 2014 code because of fair housing requirements. And also, the US HUD is asking that the water closet within the bathroom has to be precisely at 18-inch on center from the side wall. So there's no longer an allowance of between 16 to 18 inches to mount that water closet. And this is based on their requirement under the fair housing. Same idea here. The US HUD also requested that the side wall has to be longer than 18 inches. It has to be 24 inches minimum long length. And on the rear wall, 36 inches is the standard for that length. However, if you have a lavatory or some other obstructions, you are allowed to go down to 24 inches. So finally, I'm going to touch on the issue of window guards in Chapter 12, Interior and Environment. The section 1203.4 requires that, in Chapter 12, you'll find information about your window, the required amount for your ventilation and light. And I think typically it's 6 square feet of operable surface. So that 6 square foot is provided by design. However, you're allowed to provide window stops at the outset so that the window cannot be lifted up higher than, I think, 4.5 inches. That window stop can be removed upon request by the tenant occupying the unit. But at that point, when the window stop is removed, there has to be window guards put in place. And recently, we have heard on the news of some unfortunate events. So this is the piece that is required by Department of Health, and we refer to the Department of Health for their rules about the window guard requirements. And the information can be found on the DOH website. And this is an example of that window guard placed underneath that window within that 6 square feet. And that's the last slide. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Gus Sarakis, and he's our department's engineer. And I'm going to introduce him. Gus Sarakis joined the New York City Department of Buildings in 2006 and has taken a leading role in many efforts to improve construction standards and safety in the city of New York. As executive director of the Technical Affairs Division, Gus's projects have included the revision of the structural provisions of the 2008 construction codes, the establishment of the DOB Concrete Enforcement Unit, the development of the DOB special inspection requirements, and working with the public to resolve construction issues. He has served on the ICC-IBC Structural Committee since 2007, most recently as the vice chair. Gus is a past director of the Structural Engineers Association of New York and serves on ACI Committee 562, Evaluation, Repair, Rehabilitation of Concrete Buildings. That's a mouthful. Prior to joining DOB, Gus worked for 9 years as a structural engineer and project manager for architectural and engineering consulting firms in New York City area. Like I said, he's a licensed engineer, so trust him, he's the best.